Even after the Civil War, things weren't always civil in the Deep South. Slavery had been emancipated, but racism still engulfed our nation. African Americans gained their freedom only to face Jim Crow laws, intense hatred, and an overall sense of inferiority. And when the Ku Klux Klan rose from the ashes of Confederate battlefields, African Americans had even bigger fears. They could potentially become the victims of Southern justice, where innocent blacks were convicted in front of angry mobs of whites and sometimes even lynched. This type of corruption in the courts is very well exemplified in the case of the Scottsboro boys.
The Scottsboro boys were a group of 9 black men ages from 13 to 19. All these boys attempted to freeload a freight train that left Chattanooga for Memphis on March 25, 1931. The train would be stopping in Huntsville and Scottsboro, Alabama, right in the heart of the racist South. J.D. Stevens, an 80-year-old African-American from Scottsboro, remembers the environment he grew up in. Quoting, I was told as a child to fear the white men. If you spoke for what was right, 9 times out of 10 they would kill you. My daddy was even more scared of a white man than a rattlesnake.
The white hobos on board knew of this too. According to reports, 2 white hobos jumped in the same car as the 9 boys around Jackson County, Alabama. They told their black counterparts to either leave the train or find another car because they, quote, didn't want to ride with Negroes. When the 2 white men lost the fight that happened shortly after, they informed the station master that a bunch of Negroes beat them up. The station master phoned the deputy and sent to arrest every black person on the train. While the deputy was on the train, 2 white females named Rudy Bates and Victoria Price claimed that they were raped to avoid charges for riding the train without tickets. These allegations resulted in all 9 boys being arrested and sent to Scottsboro, Alabama for trial. The youngest boy, Roy Wright, was only 13 years old.
When news of the arrest made it across the state, thousands of whites were outraged. Violent mobs constantly swarmed the courthouse in Scottsboro. It got so bad that the Alabama National Guard was called into just to prevent a lynching. The 4 original trials, just 4 days in total, and the outcome. A weak defense attorney failed to even cross-examine the prosecution, and within hours, the all-white juries returned guilty in all 9 cases. Out of the 9 boys, only little Roy White avoided a death sentence the first time around. The remaining 8 were set to die on July 10th. That was supposed to be the story of the Scottsboro boys, but a group known as ILD, International Labor Defense, decided to defend the boys.
They saw the case as an opportunity to aid the national fight against racism and prove just how cruel the South could be to African Americans. They knew that it would take more than clear evidence to clear the boys, so the ILD also decided to use the media to gain support. They quickly began promoting the case nationwide, and ILD lawyers earned a review in the cases by the Alabama Supreme Court. When the state court upheld the conventions, though, it was time to turn to the national scene.
In the November of 1932, the U.S. Supreme Court finally became the first court to support the Scottsboro boys. In the case Powell v. Alabama, the Supreme Court voted 7-2 in favor of the accused, stating that the original trials were unfair. They ordered new trials for all the defendants. However, even in new trials, struggled to change the old outcomes. ILD defense attorney Sam Lebowitz in particular worked tirelessly to defend the group. He ripped victim Victoria Price's testimony to shreds, through medical evidence and multiple holes in her story. In addition, the accuser, Ruby Bates, even admitted to fabricating the whole story. Despite all this, the jury still returned with death sentence recommendations.
But it wasn't just the jury who mattered. In a heroic act of courage, Judge James Horton overruled the jury. He opened his mind to the defense's case, which included a medical examiner who believed the girls were lying. The decision ruined his career, but it also kept the Scottsboro boys out of the electric chair.
After one more circuit through the state and U.S. Supreme Court system, the outcome was set. Even though the same evidence applied to all victims, they received different rulings. 4 of the boys, Roy White, Eugene Williams, Olin Montgomery, and Willie Robertson, were cleared of all charges. However, Haywood Patterson, the lead defendant, was convicted and sentenced to 75 years in prison. On top of that, Clarence Norris was sentenced to life imprisonment, and Ozzie Powell received 20 years for an attempted escape. In 1976, Clarence Norris was the last Scottsboro to be paroled.
Almost 40 years later, in 2013, the state of Alabama finally admitted their mistake. The Alabama Board of Pardons and Paroles voted unanimously to pardon the Scottsboro boys. The injustice was finally over. However, though, in the words of Darren Salter of the University of Washington, as a political and social movement and a cultural symbol, however, the Scottsboro case played an immeasurable part in undermining the structures of white supremacy in Alabama, the South, and throughout the nation.